Hello, 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 and welcome to Intercultural Spark, that show about the spark inside you that drives you to spark change in the world through mission-driven businesses and can't even speak, mission-driven businesses and life projects. So each week we usually talk to a guest with a special curiosity about how they do what they do and the ideas that drive sort of their journey through the world. I am your host, Deanna Shoss. I'm the founder of Intercultural Talk, which is a digital and real life marketing company. We often focus on technology. Actually, the first Thursday of the month, we often focus on technology. And you could say technically that this show is about technology because my guest today, we're actually celebrating his Yahrzeit, which is the anniversary of when he passed away. So today's guest is my dad, who passed away in 2016. Dad is, I guess you could say, or technically would have been the best guest. He's witty, he's charming, he's insightful, and he was a long time really successful entrepreneur. So I could not be more excited to welcome my dad and everyone who's watching today. Welcome to Intercultural Spark. All right. So the stories you're going to hear today were actually recorded on May 30th, 2012. And the person who was interviewed, who was clearly just tickled by my dad, as you'll see from her laughter and things sometimes, but her name's Nancy Kaiser. And this was part of the Missouri Veterans History Project. And Nancy was assisted by documenter Marilyn Donovan, and the videographer is Roger Fredericks. So the Korean War, so this was the Veterans Project. The Korean War raged from 1950 to 1953. Dad was drafted. He was allowed to finish college and then started his service at the age of 21 right after graduation. So he served in the 95th Armored Field Artillery from 1952 to 1954. Okay, I just have to do my first question this way. So, Dad, thankfully, he recovered from pneumonia, and when he was strong enough, he shipped out to Korea. So, Dad, tell us what it was like. Actually, he was in basic training at camp. So funny. I've had all kinds of huge guests, and this guest is making me the most nervous just because I'm so excited to be able to do this. So, Dad was at basic training at Camp Chaffee in Arkansas, again at 21. So, Dad, tell us what that was like. Oh, and you know what? I just realized I did my tech wrong. I'm just going to take a breather and just chill for a minute. Let me get my tech set correctly so that I can uh actually have you hear what I want you to hear. So, yeah, I guess it makes sense having such an honored guest today that I would be nervous. So, all right, here we go. This time it should work correctly because I want you to be able to hear everything that he has to say. All right, let's try it. Give me a thumbs up in the comments to make sure you can hear this. So the question was, Dad, what was Camp Chaffee like? What was basic training like?
My whole story, really, for basic training is when I got sick. The first 5 weeks were kind of uneventful. It was miserable, but it was uneventful. Sixth week, I got sick, and I went to sick call, and they gave me some kind of an antibiotic. So they thought I might have strep throat. They weren't sure, and I went back, kept on going. And the seventh week or so, I remember there was one thing you went through where you got out of a trench and you crawled on your stomach with overhead fire. Okay, I was halfway through. The firing stopped. Lights went on. Yeah, soldier, you. I couldn't even crawl all the way. That's how weak I was. So I go back to the hospital in the seventh week, and I see a doctor there, and he recommends 24 to 48 hours light duty. It was 1 January 53, and I had 101 fever. Okay. The next day, it's all night long. I had a pain in my chest, and they called our first sergeant in, a man who I referred to as Fatherly Pop Atkins. He was really a bastard. But then, anyhow, he says, "What's the matter, Hoss?" "I can't breathe, Sarge." Throw another blanket on it. He'll be okay. Luckily for me, and that's why I'm here now, one of the guys sneaked down to the PX and called an ambulance. And the ambulance came to my barracks, and they took me to the hospital. Now I've got 104.8 fever.
Ooh.
And nobody sees me. I check in the
So
afternoon.
they took you to civilian hospital?
No. I was in. You checked in at the B1 in the Army hospital, and I had to walk from there to B17, which was my ward, went way off. And all the doctors had gone home. So nobody looked at me all night. I went through another night of that. And then there's a doctor comes by. I remember his name was Hyman Bloom. I found out later he was a dermatologist. So he gets to the bed next to me. "Are you going to look at me?" "No, I don't have your record yet, soldier." "You better look at me, I think." So he did. He says, "You really got it." I said, "Yeah, I know." "Can you know?" They put me in a separate room in an oxygen tent. I was in there for almost a month.
Wow.
And all told, when I got through rehab and everything, I had 4 months in the Army hospital.
And it was pneumonia?
As they called my, I tell you when I started to get well. I'm in an oxygen tent one day, and I was so miserable. I didn't know what time it was. And I look up. Here's my father at the door to my room in his camel hair coat and his hat. I thought, "Oh my God, I must be dying." I mean, I've told the story so many times, it's almost like, but I really said, "God, you got to get going. You got to hustle, you know." And I think I did start to get better. They told him it was an old-fashioned pneumonia. So he told him to get an old-fashioned doctor. When it was all over, my lung was completely impacted, and it still adheres to my diaphragm. If I had not gotten sick, I would have been there during combat, because it ended around June of 53. And there were a couple of guys in my basic of it who did get killed.
Really?
Yeah.
So, Dad, thankfully, my dad obviously, thankfully recovered from pneumonia. And then when he was strong enough, he shipped out to Korea. So, here, Dad is going to tell us what the travel was like on the way to Taegu.
The next story is ugly, but I got to tell it. We got on board ship in Puget Sound, Thanksgiving. Big turkey dinner, really loaded the troopers up, right? We went by way of Alaska. We wake up the next morning, and we're on the high seas like this, and they're 4 bunks high if you're an enlisted man. And it's a big, fat guy from South Carolina named Polk, right above me. He leans over and lets go. Right on the floor. Right next. Oh my God, I got to get out of here. So I got up real quick and ran up on the deck, and now everybody's throwing up. And I got sick after a few hours. And for the next 2 days, it was unbelievably terrible. But after that, it wasn't so bad. The worst thing that happened was funny in a way, going over. One day I'm on guard duty, and they forgot to relieve me. So I come down, and I'm really yelling at some guy right in front of the troop commander's office. He comes, "What's the matter, soldier?" Well, so I tell him what happened. "You missed breakfast?" "Yes, sir." "Wait here." So that morning, the soldiers had a potato and an apple. I'm not exaggerating. That's the kind of meals we had on troop ships if you're an enlisted man. I had orange juice squeezed to order and eggs the way I like them, chippers. It reminded me years later, I used to go to New York for my boss, and I used the Yale Club. I mean, it was a fancy of a breakfast. And I thought, "Oh God, if I ever get drafted again, I'm getting my commission no matter what." It was such a contrast.
Officers ate pretty good.
Oh, they live pretty good. Oh, the living conditions. Yeah, really, cattle don't live any worse than me.
So, and hi, Jeff. Thank you so much for being here. That's actually wonderful. So, I had to share that gratuitously, both because it's a funny story, but actually, my dad would make fun of me for actually sharing that story of all the stories I could share. So, so moving on. So he gets to Taegu, and it turns out that baseball was actually a huge part of my dad's story in his military service. Both, he said when he got out of the hospital from being sick, that he credits baseball for actually helping with his whole recovery, like building his strength back. He said his whole body was sort of atrophied. But it turns out, and I didn't even realize the extent of what a good player he was. He was on the baseball team at WashU. His brother-in-law, my uncle Stan, who apparently was connected to the Giants organization at the time, got him into baseball in the Army. And it was a huge part of everything my dad did in the Army. So here is the story about baseball and in the Army and in Korea.
Then I see a posting on the bulletin board in the day room. Anybody interested in going to a coach's clinic for baseball in Seoul, sign up here. Wow. I must have been the only guy that signed up because they sent me. And it was great. The coach Rod, I can't think of Rod's last name, from USC was running the thing, and I got to see Seoul and whatnot. And then it came back, and when the baseball season started, I made the team there. And since the fighting had ended now already, to keep the troops interested, we traveled all over the country playing everybody who had a team, or they would come through and play us. I think the neatest thing of that, of all the baseball experience, on Armed Forces Day, we played the Iraq Army All-Stars, because they had teams all over the country. They brought them all into Taegu to play us. It's just a flat field, and there are open sewers, on the sides, and they slanted like this. There's 5,000 people sitting on the edges of these things, and I relieved. And that day, for some reason, I had a pretty good curveball going. And the Koreans didn't cheer. What they would do is go, ooh. So the first time I threw a curveball, 5,000 people go, ooh. It was really a funny experience. But we lined up on the foul lines, like you've probably seen in the movies sometimes, presented flowers at home plate, all that stuff. Yeah, it was
So
neat.
you were a pitcher?
I was a pitcher. That's because I couldn't hit good enough. I started as an outfielder, but I ended up being a pitcher. I always say, whenever I won, they spelled my name wrong. Whenever I lost, they spelled it right. Oh, here it is. Here it is. Okay. Can I just read a little bit of this?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. The K-Mag advisors combine hard hitting and a pitching staff that has been stingy with runs, blasted their way to the TMP League Championship. Big Bill Shoss, who formerly pitched for Washington University of St. Louis, scattered 8 hits as he went the distance for his 3rd consecutive win. There could have been other articles where they had 3rd consecutive loss, but this one, as a matter of fact, a buddy of mine from home saw some of these articles, and he stopped by and saw me. They used to cover us, and here's a good picture for you. I can take this one out if it's easier. We lost in the finals. You can see that picture of our
And
guys.
where are you on that?
I am right here, the second one.
Right here?
Sitting down there in the front row.
Or there's one here?
This guy right here. We had just lost in the All Korea finals, and our commanding general came into the dugout, and he says to us, "You men have been screwed." And he said, "I'm going to show you." And because the winners got to go to Japan and play in the All Far East tournament, he sent us to Japan for a week anyhow, because he thought we should have won the game. By that time, I was the ranking NCO, so I was responsible for all these bums for a week in Tokyo and getting them back to the plane on time.
So actually, thank you so much to everyone who's watching live. And I invite you to say hello or share any memories and things of my dad as well. It's amazing to me how real it feels listening to these stories firsthand. It's really just so much fun to watch. So this next story that you're going to hear, I just want you to keep in mind when you listen to this story. This story I know, not because I heard it from my dad, but I heard it from my son, who was 10 years old at the time, who heard it. He was excited to tell me the whole story that he learned after the weekend he spent with Grandpa. And just note that my son repeated the whole story to me, including my dad's commentary at the end. So let's take a listen to this story once he was kind of into the groove of being stationed where he was. So things had gotten good enough in Korea that we were doing some things around socially. So they had an all adjutant general party at the Chinese restaurant in Taegu. It was on limits with dates, And those 2 guys kept betting Bug that he wouldn't bring a woman named Cutie, who ran the most notorious brothel in the country. I've seen people who were stationed everybody knew who Cutie was. So he takes some bets, and he's got some pretty big bets. Okay, the day before the party, he comes to me, "Bill, you got to help me. What's the matter? I got all this money out there. I can't go over there by myself." So in a weak moment, I said, okay. It was off limits, of course. So at night, we sneak across the street, and we go there. Here's Cutie, this notorious, what she is. She's dressed up like she's going to the prom. We sneak back to the street, which is now we're on limits. As we're walking down the street, all the little kids are going, "Cutie, Cutie." They all knew her, So we get to the place where the party is, and it's on the 2nd floor of the restaurant. So we come in, and we're walking up the stairs, and I said, "What am I doing here?" And we get up here, and there's a band playing, and they're dancing. And Colonel Butler, who's head of our group, looks through the door and sees us. The band stops playing, and I figure I'm going straight to jail. But we come in, and all of a sudden he goes like this. The whole room gives us a standing O and applause. And the rest of the night, everybody treats Judy like she was a lady, and she danced with everybody and whatnot. Then when the party was over, the
went back and went to her place of employment. What an experience. I'll never forget that as long as I live. Here's James H. Bard with Cutie at the party.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Most Korean women are not heavily endowed. This woman was very heavily endowed. That's why she was so famous.
Dad,
In fact,
Dad. So too funny. So yeah, so I did hear that story, but much later that he shared it with my son rather than with his family. So the next thing, it's fascinating when you look at, we're sharing memories of my dad, but now what we have is a letter that my dad wrote to his mom. So it's really amazing to hear actually my dad and what a wonderful detailed writer he was, but also that connection to to know that he was writing home to his mom while he was away. Because think about it, he was still a kid. He's like 21, 22, 23 when he got out of the service.
Some letters that I wrote to my mother,
wow.
which I found really interesting to tell you. Dear folks, greetings from Yeongdong-po. It seems that the Incheon Repo Depot has two branches, one of which is here in the suburbs of Seoul, known as Yeongdong-po. We pulled in about 3 in the morning, following a 16-hour train ride across and through the Korean peninsula. By tomorrow, the next day, I hope to be assigned to an outfit. There's nothing to do here but to eat and sleep. We made numerous stops on the way north, and each one, crowds of little kids ran into the train offering apples and other stuff for sale. We bought nothing, of course, but some guys threw them candy, and they swarmed on the stuff like a bunch of magpies. It was pretty chilly, but the kids were barefoot and in rags. Only about 3 out of 5 babies survive, a small wonder. The towns farther north seem to be a little cleaner, but none of them are bargains. In the country, there are little villages with mud huts topped with thatched roofs. Rice fields cover every bit of the land that is close to being laid. Also, we pass through many tunnels, some of which are very long. I hope the travelogue doesn't bore you. I had told her I was going to a different place. He was
Okay. So I thought it was interesting. And as Kara said, he was such a good storyteller, rich in details. That is so true. So what's interesting about this next story, this is what was fascinating when I found this interview. And I literally stumbled upon it by Googling William G. Shoss one day. But this next story is one that my dad and I never got to the same, I'm saying it wrong, but the same page on. I had written about this story on my blog. It's a story about when he was on R&R and my dad and his friend who were white went into town with a group of other enlisted men who were Black. I got the story wrong. When I wrote about the story, I said that it was the white guys who had the car and were driving, which I think in some ways just belies my own sort of bias or understanding. And when my dad pointed that out to me, I said, tell me the story. I'll write about it. I'll correct it because I'd written it on the blog. And we never got to do that. And what's amazing to me now is that he actually is telling the story here. So now you are getting the correct story from the source and actually how it influenced him.
I was going down to Chicago with some buddies, and I was well enough to get a pass by that time. So you want to go to, I mean Little Rock, excuse me. So he doesn't tell me what kind of guys they are. Well, it's 4 Black guys. And we're going down State Highway 22 from Fort Smith to Little Rock in 1953. That was before any integration or anything. It was some experience. We had to go to our own gas stations. We had to split when we got to Little Rock and then meet again.
Stay in a different hotel, right?
Yeah. And it was really something for just a couple of days at least to experience what Black people went through in those days.
Mm-hmm. What Dad had actually shared about that story. So it was staying at different hotels and things like that. But he said every time that they got into town, that he and his friend had to actually get out of the car to walk into town just because of how segregation was raging at the time. They and how it worked, they actually couldn't even drive into town together. And it was just something, I think that perspective taking was something that impacted him. And it's something actually now that really carries on in all of his children who are activists in some form or another. So that is Dad's Army story. He came back from the Army. He assumed he was going to go into business with his dad, but then his dad's company went under. So now we're going to shift. He's talking about how he built his long career in sales and ultimately advertising. So let's hear about that.
Well, it was a circuitous route, I always like to say. When my father went under, I had a good friend who owned a building in Clayton in a new business that just started there. He said, these guys sound kind of, why don't you go see them? So it turns out they started a little company. They only had 3 employees. I was their 4th one. They took a home, and they had some teaching aids called Dolch games. They've been used in schools everywhere. And we made them for a home edition. And that's back when, I don't know if you can remember this, there was a book called Why Johnny Can't Read by a man named Flesh.
I heard of it.
And so they stopped teaching phonics and nobody could read. So they started Carson Perry Scott, and they had Dolch himself there one Saturday.
Wow.
And these were $1 games. They sold 15,000 games in one weekend. So I came in and I was supposed to work for Mr. Wibner, who was a retired ad guy, and be, a marketing inside guy. And then I went on one sales trip and with one of the other kids. And then they sent me to the Southeast, Nashville, Chattanooga, Atlanta, up the East Coast, back to a trade show. And I sold stuff, wherever I went. And so that's what I did. And I wound up being sales manager for half the country for them.
Wow.
Then they sold out to Webster Publishing Company, and I came inside there for product development. And then we met a company, and this guy turned out to be a crook, John Van Gelder, 6'4", tartan plaid vest, and they had a magnetic paint. You paint this on the wall, put magnets on the back of those pictures, and you can hang them up. So my boss says, tie this guy up for teaching age, So he offers me a job, this guy. Con men always know how to play on your own weaknesses. Mm-hmm. Could you start a company that made magnetic teaching aids and toys? Oh, sure, I can do that. So I left and went to work for him. Found out a few months later that he had walked off the honor farm in California and had gone to Lake of the Ozarks and met some rich people from St. Louis. They brought him into town. And one of the guys who owned my company his grandfather was Phil Ball, who won the St. Louis Browns years ago. Anyhow, he started this thing, and it seemed like it was legitimate. And when I got in there, I could see it wasn't good. And I was on the board by that time. And we had a meeting one day, and Courtney Shands, whose father was Admiral Shands from NASA, this is the level of people that were involved. Chances are we won't ever see Mr. McDougall again. That's probably not his name, and stuff like that. 2 bank presidents resigned on the spot who were on the board. But I was so embarrassed, particularly after my father's debacle, that I volunteered to stay on. And we made it into a company. Wow. I did their advertising for almost 30 years. My little company that I started, I called it Magnavisual.
So, so when he talks about doing their advertising 30 years, that was a big part of us growing up. Anybody who knows the Shoss girls, like we had this basement that was just full of toys. We always had like magnets and just fun stuff that you could play with. So that was the company Magnavisual. Even after he left to open his advertising agency, he handled all of their advertising. This next story, you have no idea what it meant to me to find this story. When my dad was in the rehab facility, he was dying, and he all of a sudden he really wanted to tell stories, and he wanted us to record them. And this was back in 2016. Other people's phones may have worked this way, mine didn't. I wasn't able to record this story, and I've just kicked myself for not being able to capture something that clearly was so important to him. And you would not believe, but he tells the story that he wanted to share that day right here. It's unbelievable. He was so proud of this moment. So here's the story actually of how my dad did a sales call on Verner Von Braun at NASA.
Because they were visual teaching aids and things, and a whole lot of different things happened after that. Talk about meeting people and seeing people. God, I gave a briefing one time at Verner Von Braun's private briefing room in Huntsville, and it went well. And they said, well, why don't you go to Houston, NASA? I had a little board about this big I used to carry in my attaché case. So I go down to NASA, and I showed a guy his stuff. He said, could you come back after lunch? There's a few more people want to see your stuff. Okay, fine. I come back after lunch. A few more people are coming than we thought. Takes me into a room. You see it on TV back when there's a huge conference table. There's 32 guys around the table. There's several $100,000 worth of audiovisual equipment behind me, and I set my little board on the table. It was so ludicrous. I couldn't stop laughing, but it went well. And by the time I got back to his office, my contact's office, some dealer in town had got wind of what was going on. I already had a $5,000 order waiting for me on the desk. But no, I got to see people and do things with that company. That would, if I'd made any money, I never would have left because it was really fascinating. When the C-5A plane came on board, I had a dealer in Atlanta named Ivan Allen. His father was mayor of Atlanta, and they had to show how they would control the project. the whole thing was based on our stuff. They painted all the walls with the
Oh my
magnets. We had millions of magnets and boards, and it was a fascinating installation. But I got to see that too.
So this was all of this part of the career. It almost feels like this was such a huge part of his career. He actually went out and opened his own advertising agency not until 1975. And mind you, this interview was in 2012 when Dad was 81. So this next question here is when did you retire, sir?
I'm cleaning out my office this week.
Oh, wow.
When I left Magna Visual, I went to Direct Mail Corporation of America, which was headquartered. I worked there for 8 years. Then I started my own agency in 1975. 1991, I didn't feel good, and I was told I had something called light chain disease, and I went to the Mayo Clinic, and it's a bone marrow thing, and he told me, this won't kill you, but if you don't stop working the hours you are, the combination will kill you. So I came home and sold my business, and I went to a company called Cupper Parker, which was a big agency. You know Cupper? You know Bruce?
I know the name.
Yeah, well, of course nobody would admit knowing him if they knew him. Anyhow,
Actually, sorry, I just have to say I did meet Bruce Cupper. He is the only person ever. He was thinking of opening an office in Boston when I lived there. It's the only interview I've ever had where someone asked me if I was planning to have children, which is such an illegal question. But yes, that was Bruce Cupper.
he gave me a good deal, 5-year buyout and a 5-year employment contract there. So I miraculously recovered after a little chemotherapy, and I worked there 5 years. Then I had started a thing called Shoss Wegman Direct, and that became part of Jerome Group. And then I got tired of doing that, and the guy I had known at Cupper Parker was part of a little agency called R&S at the time, and we had lunch one day, and why don't you come here? So I did, and he had a partner, Elvis Ross, and about 4 months after I was there, he walked out and went back to Cupper Parker. So I thought I was going to have to retire then. He says, no, you're doing fine. I've been with her 12 years. I'm 81. And I had 2 great uncles who worked into their 80s. It was always kind of my role models. And so I'm cleaning out my office right now, literally.
So that is so wonderful conversation with my dad. If anyone watches the show regularly, we have different segments on it. And right now is time for the flash photo stories. So the flash photo stories are when I flash a photo on the screen, and then actually in this case, I flash a photo on the screen, and in this case, then I also tell a story about it. So this first one is, you could call it nepotism, because I was Miss Direct Mail Marketing of 1969. It was my first job in the advertising field. My dad was, he was Direct Marketer of the Year. He was the president of the Direct Mail Marketing Association. So that is actually quite a fun photo to share. That's what's happening there. But here's the other thing here too. This is a photo I have in the house. So this is my dad with his whole team. You know, I always like to say that micro entrepreneurs are the technical definition is 11 employees or less. And if you count, there's actually 12 people working for him, 13 counting him, at least in this photo. So my dad was actually a full-fledged business advertising agency owner. And it's just fascinating because sometimes he would sort of downplay what he was doing. And anyone who's ever owned a business, this is huge and so hard. So congratulations to Dad, and just, you know, kudos to you for all your success and the amazing work that you did. So the other part that I have is actually almost show and tell. So here's the other 2 things that I want to show you, which is, oh, that's so funny. Kara knew that was coming. Yeah. And it's probably not the first time that I've actually shared my Miss Direct Mail Marketing. It's probably like the one big time I got to wear a sash. Oh, and it was rigged. Yeah, but who's going to say that about a 6-year-old? So thank you. Okay, so I have 2 more things to show. One, I hope I can get this back. Let me just show you something right here. My dad had a signature wall. Ooh, look at that. When you walked into his office. So Shoss and Associates. And then when I first went into business, I always thought this was kind of cool. I took his logo, and I was originally Shoss and Associates Strategic Marketing. So kind of fun to take my dad's legacy and bring it today. But here's the thing I really want to show you. So my dad did direct mail, and I used to do letters where I'd write, to letters like solicitation letters, fundraising. And my dad, like, that's not really direct mail. Because direct mail, when done effectively and right, is amazing. So let's look at this. So this is a box. It's a big red box that says puzzled. This would have gone to people who, look at this. So you open it up and it says, so the customer was Alvi. Alvi presents a breakthrough solution to the mixed load pallet puzzle. So it's people who've got mixed loads on their pallets. They don't know what to do, how to do it. This is so brilliant. Take a look at what this is. It's a Rubik's Cube on a miniature pallet. So it's, like if you have to explain it, you get it. The mixed load, the puzzle on the pallet, so brilliant. Like, and this was just one of many examples of what my dad did with direct marketing. He did one where he mailed a stopwatch to movie theaters, and it invited people to call them in, and it bet the movie theaters that if they use the stopwatch to time how long it took to fill a soda, that his client would be faster. It was just amazing. And that over time would save huge amounts of money. Just these really brilliant, absolutely creative things that he did. So the final section of our show, Kara said that's correct, which is correct. Dad is brilliant, probably, and creative. Unbelievable. So the last thing that we have for our show is we always do our ta-da flash exercise. So the flash exercise, because I'm also a group fitness instructor, the flash exercise is always an exercise that is indicative of today's show. So you might think, well, what exercise you can do? It's something that you can do at your desk. I'm going to invite you to do it with you. It is not, I can't believe, but Dad would be like, I can't believe you just said this. My dad would think this is funny. It's not corpse pose from yoga. So just rule that one out right away. That would have been gratuitous. Jerry Witkowski, who is a grandparenting activist, he said, and I'll show you that exercise. He said it should be a medial deltoid stretch, because the medial deltoid stretch, you draw your arm, do it with me. You draw your arm in front of your body and then you pull it in. It stretches the side of your shoulder. So you're here or you're here. This exercise stretches your arms so that you can do a really good hug. And so, of course, being able to spend this time, and so grateful for everyone who's watching today to actually see, Bill Shoss, our dad, uncle, friend, etc., in action is full of love. But here's the exercise I really want to do. This is a variation of mountain pose. So in your chair, I want you to scoot back in your chair, put your back against the back of your chair. I want you to put your feet, if you can hear that, that's my feet on the ground. Put your feet flat on the ground, right under your knees, and then take your shoulders back and down so that you're almost, think of your esophagus like as a straight line. I want you to breathe in. As you do, fill your belly button, fill your stomach with air, like there's a balloon behind your belly button. So feet are grounded on the floor. You're breathing in and you're breathing out. This is sort of a version of mountain pose where your feet are grounded on the floor, sort of connecting you to the center of the earth. You're breathing in, you're fully present in your space. And the reason I like this one for our dad is no matter what our dad said about what he could do or what was happening in the world, he was a trooper. He was always present and there when you needed him. He was the one who picked you up when you got in trouble. He was the one who talked you out of dropping out of college when you thought about doing it. He was the one who was always there. And I like that idea of the mountain pose because Dad always said, blood is thicker than water. Family was paramount. He had friends. When he passed, he was surrounded by friends he had known since 4th grade. He was so grounded and centered and steady and loyal. And so that's why mountain pose is the exercise for my dad. Thank you so much for joining today. I love all the love and comments that came in. This interview, so thank you to the Missouri Veterans History Project. This interview is actually available on the Library of Congress. In every place I post the show, I will post the link to the full interview. It's actually an hour long. So there's even more stories from where this came from. And I know the more that I watched the stories, the more that I really felt like I was having this this connection. It's just so much fun to watch him. And I felt so connected in real time with him as I listened to all of the stories that made up the story of his life. So thank you so much for watching. Next week, we welcome Dr. Margot Jacot. It's May is Mental Health Awareness Month. And so Dr. Margot will be here to talk about your nervous system and how to reset it. Pam, thanks for being here. Again, thank you, everyone. I hope we'll see you again on Intercultural Spark. And thanks for sharing such a wonderful love for such an absolutely wonderful man who just influenced so many people in life. So we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.